Hey everyone, Jonathan Eversole with the Invention Club again. I've been working on a project for the last few months that I really wanted to share. We have some wonderful neighbors that invite me and my family over to use their pool on regular occasion during the summer. In addition, when my family goes away, my wife and my son, they usually go away 3 or 4 weeks out of the year to visit in-laws out of state. And when they do that, for some reason, my neighbors think that they need to take care of me. So they invite me over quite a bit, feed me, because they think I'm going to starve. So anyway, we wanted to try to do something nice for them. Just last year, they made a really nice bar in their basement and made a really nice bar kitchen area. So we thought, what could we do to try to say thank you? So we thought, what better to go with a bar than a bottle opener? So we made one. Let me show you how we did that. So for this project, I had no idea where to start. I've never made a bottle opener, and I knew I needed some parts and dimensions. So I sourced the parts and then bought a bottle opener so I can take some general dimensions for the project. One of the things I really disliked about the bottle opener I purchased was that the bottle cap catcher couldn't be removed. So whenever the bottle cap catcher was full, you'd have to remove the entire thing off the wall to be able to empty it. This was an important feature I wanted to change in my bottle cap catcher. First, I created a general overall design with the dimensions that I took from my bottle opener that I purchased. Since I wanted to make it more three-dimensional, I had to break it up into multiple parts. To do that, I created 3 distinct pieces: the base, the top sign portion, and then I added some scrolls next to the bottle opener to make it look nicer. Then, using the parts that I purchased, I used a little trick to be able to see if the parts that I purchased would fit my design size. The trick is scaling the screen to the size of the actual part and holding it up over top of the screen image. This works really well with trying to get a full visual of the product before you even make it. After I was happy with the design I created, I then created the 3D model cuts to visualize how the parts would look. They looked great, so we were ready to start working. I wanted this project to be a little rustic, so I found an old piece of barnwood I could use. I checked it for nails and then ran the planer across the back side. After, I cut out the middle of the stock to be able to use for the base, then affixed it to the table so I could start cutting. The first part of cutting the base is to clear the center area where the bottle cap opener and the catcher go, and then where the name plaque goes at the top. Since this is old barnwood, it's a lot more fragile than new lumber. The piece I chose has a lot of knots and cracks, so I ran the router at a really high speed and much slower than I normally would, so it wouldn't put too much stress on the workpiece. So, I sped up the recording as much as 10,000% to make this video go a lot faster. This part of the job took almost 5 hours to complete. Here, I'm just checking the hole sizes to make sure they'll work for the screws I picked for mounting, and then cleaned up the work surface a bit. Next, we carved the text into the base that we'll end up filling with the tabletop epoxy. Now we change out the bit again to a smaller finishing bit to clean up the inside edges. In the videos, you'll see me changing out the router bit multiple times. Each router bit has its own shape and purpose. The larger bits are generally used for clearing large areas, and the smaller bits are used for clearing a smaller area. The carving of the text is done with yet another bit called a V-bit, and you guessed it, it's the shape of a V, whereas most of the bits are used to clear wood or mostly flat. In this part of the video, we're starting to carve the outside edge of the base with a ball nose router bit. They have a curved end to them and can be used to make three-dimensional edges like we're doing here. They move and cut in very small passes to create the rounded edges. Now we're cutting out the edge of the workpiece to remove it from the stock. This is called a profile cut since it cuts around the profile of your workpiece. At this stage, I like to remove the dust catcher so I can watch to make sure the router bit doesn't cut too deeply into the wood or knock the workpiece loose. It makes a mess but allows me to react faster if I need to pause the job or turn off the router for any reason. Near the end of the profile cut, I slowed down the video to normal speed so you can see the router cut, or more appropriately not cut, tabs in the profile cut phase. Watch the router raise and lower in 3 places on the side when cutting. This leaves a bit of stock that keeps the workpiece secure and in place. These are called tabs, and we can easily remove them later with a small knife and sand them flat. And there we have it. The base cut is complete. Time to clean up this mess. Now we're all cleaned up, we can remove the workpiece from the table. You can see how easy it is to remove the work from the stock by popping the edges off. You can see the router bit didn't cut 100% through the bottom edge. This is normal since the router table isn't 100% flat. This excess wood can easily be removed because it's very thin. They call this leftover wood onion skin because of how thin it typically is. You can see me removing a lot of it with my fingers and peeling it off the edge. However, some of the edges where the grain of the wood is much thicker, but it's easily removed with a utility knife. Then a bit of light sanding to remove any excess pieces and the remnants of the tabs, and it's all done. Okay, now this part I never like to work on. I love the effect, but it's just time-consuming and tedious work, but it's always worth it. I'm going to fill the carved words with tabletop epoxy. I like to cover all areas of the work where I'm going to be using the epoxy because I'm always bound to make a mistake and drip some epoxy in an area where it shouldn't be. And epoxy doesn't wipe up easily, so it's better to protect the work than try to fix a mistake. After mixing the epoxy and getting it to the right color, I use a combination of toothpicks and pins to drip the epoxy into the channels cut out for the lettering. You have to be very careful not to drip too much or it will run across your work area where you don't want it to go. And you don't want too little or it will be pocketed and not look like the rest. It also stinks to have to go back and mix more epoxy to fix 2 or 3 small spots, since it takes about 72 hours to fully cure tabletop epoxy. And something else you have to be careful of is adding too much too fast. If you do that, it will create air bubbles in the work. You can use a torch to get the bubbles out, but because we're placing it in wood, we can't really do that or it'll burn the wood, and that's not the look we're going for in this piece. So to resolve the issue of the air bubbles, I add very small amounts over many layers. This avoids most of the air bubbles and allows most that do form to rise to the top. Any leftover I pop with the tip of a pin. That seems to work really well. And to be as exact as possible, I use my handy dandy magnification lenses to be able to be more precise and pop those air bubbles when necessary. These videos were taken in time lapse and sped up 100%, so that gives you an idea of how much time it takes to fill in the letters. But again, the time is well worth it in the end. Now we just carefully remove the surgery gown, and I let it sit for 72 hours to cure. It's starting to look good. Now it's time to do the top. Now check out this trick. Notice the 3 blue circles in the simulation in relation to the lettering. They are the drill holes in the software, but I use them to simulate key workpiece areas. Now look at the nail holes in the raw stock material on the right. I measured the nail holes and then aligned the cutting job so the holes wouldn't interfere with the lettering. After creating the cut job and attaching the workpiece, it's time to get started. I also sped up this video by 100%. This one is a bit more interesting to watch as it carves out the letters. After carving out the letters, it's time for yet another neat little trick. I want the letters to be painted, but not the background. However, painting the individual letters is very time consuming and I make way too many mistakes. Instead, we tape off the work and paint it prior to performing the background cut. This will leave the painted parts and remove the paint from the newly cut areas. Hint though, make sure you let the paint dry thoroughly or it will dull and gum up your router bits. Next, we start to remove the background in stages, with the largest bits first, down to a very small bit to get between the letters and in the very tight spaces. Finally, we start the profile cut with tabs, just like we did with the base. Then we separate and clean up those edges again. After letting the tabletop epoxy cure for 72 hours, it's time to do some serious sanding. I start off with finer sandpaper to test the hardness of the wood and the epoxy. I then switch to a more coarse sandpaper to remove the majority of the epoxy, followed by finer sandpaper again to finish up. And the last piece of our project we need to make are the scrolls. Again, I measured the workpiece and made sure the scrolls fit between the nail holes and started the cut job. The first part is a clearing path that cuts and removes most of the stock. Then we change the bit out to a smaller bit to give it some more dimension. Then we use a superfine carving bit to add the great detail. And finally, we use a small bit to perform the profile cut around the intricate parts of the scrolls to cut it from the stock. And they just missed the nail holes, so our measurements paid off. They look great, and I love the direction of the grain in the wood through them. Now we can do a little bit of assembly to make sure everything fits. After a little sanding, the top name plaque fits much better, so things are moving along. Alright, so you guys know me. I wanted to do something special for this project, and I wanted to do something that was different. So what if this project told its own story? What if I added a QR code that links to this video? I didn't know if I could do that, but I was going to find out. The first step is to adjust the laser to a very specific XY point on the workpiece. That's our starting point. I use a trick by aligning the laser to a hole in the workpiece over top of a black Phillips head drywall screw. The screw rests in the center of the hole, which is centered, and then the laser can be focused into the center of the cross pattern in the top of the screw. It makes it easy to see which direction you have to move the laser to get it in the center. Next, I use an 1/8 inch laser guide to make sure it is positioned correct distance from the work, so it doesn't overburn or underburn the wood. Then we can get started. And while using the laser to burn the wood, I use a small blower to blow the smoke away and cool down the wood so it doesn't get too much scorching next to the burn areas. Now that we're done with the laser work, you'll notice it's behind the bottle catcher. It's our little secret though. In this picture, you might notice two small dimples above the laser etching. These are guides for where to drill the holes for the bottle cap catcher. It makes them perfectly even and puts them in the right place. I also made these guides for the bottle cap opener at the top. Now that we have all of the parts, it's time to do an assembly test to make sure all the parts fit well together. Yep, it all fits well, so it's time to add our finishing touches to the outside of the parts. First, I taped off the original parts of the wood so I could apply a few coats of spray-on polyurethane to the cut regions of the wood area. I sanded down with fine sandpaper in between coats. After 3 coats, it was ready for final assembly. For the record, here are the 2 types of screws I'm using for this project. 2 cabinet screws are used to hold a bottle opener to the wall, and 4 of the small panhead screws are used to attach the bottle opener and the bottle cap catcher to the base. I'll link those and the bottle opener parts I got from Amazon in the details section of this video. I attached the bottle cap catcher and the bottle opener first and just laid the plaque and scrolls in place. Then I mixed up some epoxy so I could permanently attach the plaque and scrolls to the base. I was really generous with the epoxy on the plaque, but I tried to stay to the center of the plaque as much as possible to avoid epoxy squishing out of the sides when I put it in place. The scrolls, however, were a lot more difficult. I had a lot more cleanup work to do with those. And the last step is to place a paver on the plaque while the epoxy set. I wanted to make sure there was a nice tight seal between the plaque and the base so there weren't any gaps when we were complete. And there we go, the finished product, ready to be gifted. And hey, before we go, I have 2 last things to cover. First, can you see any of the holes where this mounts to the wall? Nope, I can't either. If you are following along, you'll notice we hid the holes where the cabinet screws are meant to go under the bottle opener and the bottle cap catcher. And remember we couldn't remove the bottle cap catcher from the bottle opener I bought? Did you notice we can easily add and remove the bottle cap catcher in our new design? Let's call that done. We hope to get a lot of use out of that this summer. Hopefully they like it. Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Thanks for watching.
So cool.
Oh, look at that. Oh, wow.
That is so awesome. We love it. Thank you. You made